Walk us through, any charges that were pressed, any things that were filed. Walk us through that process as best as possible.
Uh, but
Initially,
initially the uh, Gwinnett County Police arrived on the scene. EMS units arrived shortly thereafter. Um, I pointed out to one of the officers who arrived on the scene the shooter was um, who appeared to be trying to flee the scene, because he was outside of the building, outside of his apartment, um, closer towards the parking area, appearing as though he was just an observer of whatever commotion had taken place, but he was not aware of, what had happened. So I pointed him out to the officers and said, "There's the shooter right there." And they immediately grabbed him, placed him in handcuffs. Um, my wife was transported to Gwinnett Northside Hospital, where she required immediate surgery. I remained on the scene shortly prior to her being transported and spoke with Gwinnett police to let them know that I had a firearm and I had placed it on the floorboard. But before exiting, to go to the hospital, I did not see the firearm. So therefore, I wanted to make sure that Gwinnett police had retrieved that and that we weren't looking into another issue with, someone who was an observer picking up the weapon and taking off with it. And then we have a reported stolen weapon that we would have to deal with at that point. Um, One of the detectives, I do not recall his name, came over to the emergency room and took an interview with me. And I believe the next day or day after was my first meeting with Detective Battersby and his partner. I do not recall that detective's name either, who met me at the hospital. They questioned me in reference to certain things. They also questioned my wife that same day. Um, I think they came back on another occasion to ask some additional questions. On this particular time, the detective Battersby had requested for my wife's medical records, and she contacted me, and I asked, what is the reason why they're requesting your medical records, not requesting anything from the shooter, because there was no toxicology report taken on the night of the shooting. He admitted to consuming alcohol from what the police report says, from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. They did not do any type of blood testing to test whether or not he had consumed any type of illicit drugs or anything of that nature. But they wanted to have these records of my wife. So I felt a certain kind of way about that. And my wife refused, told him he could not obtain her records. He then went to her nurse behind her back and said he wanted to obtain her records and that she had, I guess, given permission. So she came back in and confirmed that information with my wife and said, no, I implicitly told him no, that he could not have my medical records. So at that particular point, I then filed a complaint with Gwinnett Internal Affairs for a HIPAA violation, which they then came back and told me he had every right to request those records. Um, and it just from the date of the incident, it was later discovered that it was initially submitted as a charge of a felony charge for aggravated battery or aggravated assault. I'm not exactly sure. Detectives Battersby went before the particular judge, the magistrate judge, and requested that the charges be lowered to a misdemeanor, reckless conduct. How he came about this decision of reckless conduct for someone shooting behind a closed door with someone, for someone, there was no signs of any type of forced entry. He was not in any imminent danger or threat. Um, you know, so all of this could have been easily determined through a thorough investigation. In my opinion, there was no investigation that was done at all, because the paperwork that I received from the district attorney's office after the case had been dismissed, I read through it thoroughly, and there was really nothing at all that stood out.
And it sounds like, just from what you shared, clearly there's question regarding the investigation, what was done, what was omitted. You noted, and there have been reports that have come out, that the shooter, in all likelihood, there's a strong possibility of him being intoxicated or worse, because he had been drinking all day. So yes, there are questions regarding how do you lower, this is the question that I'm kind of gathering from you. How can you justifiably lower a charge when there are conditions present which would result in something a whole lot more aggravated or worse? That's kind of how I'm trying to condense what you've shared with us. Obviously, we hope, for as solid a recovery as possible. But the big question that I'm getting, and it's probably a parallel question, how can you lower a charge when there are questions about gathering evidence and questions about if this person was in this type of condition? Yeah. How can you justify lowering the charge?